It's nice to see you here again in this conversation we have exploring the space where we come to glorify God. And as you all know, you faithful Epiphany folk, one of the key components to how we praise God within our tradition is through music. And in particular, the music of the organ. We have today as our special guest somebody who you may remember, Zach Hemenway, who's our music director. Zach, would you come on in? So I'm going to invite Zach in. He's recently COVID tested, so he is clean. I'm going to put on my COVID mask, and we're going to have a talk about the organ and about music and about Zach. Because all that stuff in our system is wound together in the most wonderful way. Zach, nice to see you. Thank you for coming out for this conversation. Zach, how long have you been at Epiphany Parish?
Wow, about 2.5 years now, I think.
And came from?
Philadelphia, St. Paul's Chestnut Hill.
Right on. Now, Zach, people don't become organists by accident. Tell me your story. What inspired you as a kid? Because we're going to start early, right? You got to grow into this most extraordinary artistic way of life. Tell me your story a little bit.
So I, like a lot of other kids, started piano at a pretty young age. My grandmother's house had a piano in it. My parents did not. And every time we went over Grandma's house, I couldn't be kept away from the piano. Eventually it triggered my parents into thinking, maybe this kid really likes the piano. We should get him some lessons. So I started taking piano lessons, and then when I was in 5th grade, I think, at St. Simon the Apostle Catholic School in South County, St. Louis, Missouri, the parish that I was going to was having an issue finding people to play for masses there. And they, if I remember correctly, they were having trouble finding an organist, and they couldn't, but they had this kid in the grade school who played piano decently well. So somehow I got drafted for service playing the piano for Sunday masses, and then the pastor said something to the effect of, well, hey, if you want to take organ lessons, we'd love to have you play the organ too. So I started doing that, and then I realized this could be a job. When all of my other friends were working at McDonald's, I was playing 5 masses a weekend by the 8th grade. So it sort of went from there, and the rest is history. Like 3 or 4 years later, I had given up my dream of having a career in international law in favor of becoming a church organist.
Fabulous. So. And we're glad you did. And you came here a couple of years ago, and that's been a great blessing upon the parish. So tell us, what is the origin of organs? Not this one in particular, but generally, where they come from, why did they evolve, and how they end up as centerpiece for many churches?
Well, the organ? The organ is one of the oldest instruments we have. It's evolved over several hundred years, and what's interesting about the organ is it's evolved differently in different countries and regions.
Huh.
So what's interesting about the organ is that out of any instrument, there's probably a much more vast and varied repertoire for the organ than, say, for the piano, especially, right? Because the piano has only been around for maybe, 200-300 years, something like that. Probably not 300 years. Where the organ has been around, 1400s. So you've got all of this different repertoire written in different time periods, but also because the organ in France during, say, the 17th century was vastly different in how it was built and how it sounded from an organ in Germany in the 17th century. You'd have music coming out of these two countries at the same time that were entirely different from one another and almost unplayable on each other's instruments, because it was composed with those instruments in mind, and they don't work. So lots of organs, such as this one, when they're put in churches, and the requirement is that they play lots of different music by lots of different composers from lots of different time periods, you end up with a little bit more of an eclectic instrument that might not do one time period say like 100% accurately, but can speak all languages with its own accent.
Aha,
That
that's
makes
so
sense.
interesting. I love that. Speak all languages with its own accent. So, if you had your choice, what is your favorite type or country or genre within that vast repertoire of organ music? Is that a totally unfair question?
Maybe. I tend to, in terms of recital repertoire, I tend to like the French Romantic school of composition. But in terms of the instruments that I find most thrilling, it's I just love the big English cathedral instruments, like the builders like Harrison and Henry Willis. Like these organs are majestic and lush and lots of like thick foundational tone, but they've got fire and huge dynamic range, and they're great for Anglican church music.
Yeah, which
they would be.
Which you're an expert at. So tell us about this organ. What do we have here, and what should we know about it? What's interesting? What's normal? You know, what's it made of?
Well,
How's it work?
Wood mostly. This organ was built by a firm called Noack in the late 1990s. If I had to characterize it, I'd say it's bent on more towards a German tonal sound or tonal design, with some influence of some English practices as well. So it mostly, I would say, I think it does very well with Bach. It speaks English with a slight Germanic accent, maybe, is what I would say. But it's 3 manuals. It does what it needs to for the most part. We're pretty among instruments in the Seattle area. We are very fortunate to have a fine pipe organ.
So pipe, what are those pipes up there anyway? Do they really work, or is that is that decoration for us?
No. These are all speaking pipes. Some organs, lots of pipe organs, have dumb pipes in the facade that don't speak. But in this organ, the facade pipes do indeed speak. Though the pipes that are in the facade are a part of they're both on the great manual and they're within the pedal as well. I'll explain that in a moment. But they're principal stops, which if you thought about like the kind that the organ has 4 families of stops, and principal stops are sort of like, well, the principal or foundational or most important family of organ sound.
Wow. Well, let's how about we take a look at the console itself, and you can explain how when you push your finger, sound comes out up there.
Sure.
What do you think? Let's take a look. So here you are in the driver's seat. How do you, well, as I look at this beautiful instrument, Zach, it seems like you have different woods going on here. How do the manufacturers that make these think about this? Do they run out of oak, or do they have a sale on maple? What's the thought process?
I think it's just because it looks pretty. And lots of consoles generally on the inner shell have a different, just a different wood or a different stain. Mostly for aesthetics, but aesthetics are important.
Aesthetics are important. So I'm curious, how do you start this thing up? Do you need a key, or do you?
Well, you don't. Sometimes I wish you needed a key, but actually there's just a knob right down here that you pull out, and what that does is it triggers a blower machine back up, and that pumps a bunch of pressurized air into what's called a reservoir and gets the organ ready to play.
Really, a blower machine?
Yeah.
What, like a big billow?
Think more like an airplane like a big airplane engine. It's like a circular engine that creates a fan that blows air.
And where's ours?
Ours is up behind the organ case.
Okay. Maybe we'll go look at it in a minute. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So, talk to us about what's in front of us.
So, this is the console. It's sort of like a cockpit of an airplane. Funny enough, I have a lot of organist colleagues who become pilots. Who knew? Anyway, but as you can see, this console has three, what we call, they're keyboards, but we call them manuals. And each manual controls a different sort of set or division of stops, right? So like, this manual is called the swell, and it controls all of these stops right here. And each stop, if there are 56 keys on each manual, every one of these stops that you pull out has 56, most of them, some have more, at least 56 pipes for each thing. Right, so here's 56 pipes, another 56 pipes, another. And what happens is essentially each one of these stops or sets of pipes or ranks, as we call them, is a different sound. Right, and the organist, it's kind of like painting a picture, really.
Is it written into the music, or is it
sometimes, but even most composers will just give vague suggestions. Some not at all. Even when they do give very specific instructions, that can somehow be difficult. Sometimes be difficult to follow, just because there are no two instruments in the world that are completely alike. Even if you took this organ and built the exact same instrument, say, in a church across town, it wouldn't sound the same because it would be in a different acoustic and like in a different size space. So like, and it just wouldn't work in the same way. So like every time, the organist generally has to translate what the composer's asking for into like what would work for this instrument. So say take French music written in the 1900s, part of our education is to know what those instruments sounded like, and generally what the result would have been with those stops or registrations that the composer is asking for, and then we do our best to translate and get that effect on the instrument here.
So when you're practicing, do you ask yourself, do you take out a pencil and write in the margins, these are the stops that I want to use, or do you sort of say this is the mood for Advent, and so that generates a certain thing, or does it sound different every time you play it?
It depends. I mean, every time you play something, maybe it should always be a little different, otherwise life would get boring. But what we would generally do, honestly, when I practice, I just practice on one sound for the most part. Mostly so you can concentrate on what you're actually doing and not get distracted with everything, but also to save your ears. Because if you're an organist and you're practicing a lot, and you're always practicing on that, your hearing won't last very long. When we decide on sounds that we want for a specific piece, on this organ, we would save them on these buttons called pistons. So like, these pistons are really handy. So let's say you're playing a hymn, right? And here's verse 1 of a hymn. What's your favorite hymn?
All creatures of our God and King.
Great. So verse 1. When you get to the end of verse 1, and you want verse 2 to be a different sound, you could hit this. Those settings come in handy, because otherwise what would be happening is the organist would have to do this. Right? And that would not be helpful in between every hymn verse. It would not be worshipful. It would not be effective. So
that's super funny.
Yeah.
That's neat to know. So tell me, you also have a set of keys, if you will, at your feet.
I do, yeah. So it's just a big giant keyboard that you play with your feet.
So I have a question. Sometimes when I see you playing, your hands will be on one of the flats, But there are keys moving that you're...
Correct.
What is that about?
And this is what's called a mechanical action instrument, meaning that the key is actually mechanically connected to the valve of the pipe. So think of it as like a fulcrum, right?
Okay.
So if you've got a key here, it's actually two fulcrums. Let's say here's the key.
Okay.
Address you. Here's the key, and here's the pipe, right? So if you press a key down, that's going to do that, which is going to pull this up, which will pull that down, which pulls the pallet down underneath the pipe. Right? So it's essentially two.
So it's all connected down through the floor and then back up to the pipe.
Yeah. In fact, I could even show you some of those trackers when I go.
Let's go. We'll do it.
But yeah, because it's all mechanical, when you try it, like I said, like these stops are for here, this is for here, these are for here. Sometimes you want to play it all together. So in order to do that, they have these things called couplers, which then mechanically pull these keys down. And it starts to get quite heavy, so you end up using a lot of arm movement. And the more stops you have, which means more pressurized air is coming through. So the louder the organ is, essentially, here at least, you can be assured that your organists are burning calories.
Good. Well, I'm glad. What else should we know about this before we move up and take a look at the pipes?
Well, let's see. There's the clergy eject button. I'd say the last thing that I can show you, I'd say two last things. I talked about there's 4 families of sound of the organ, and I mentioned principal stops. And that's a sound it's based off of things it's a sound that's unique to the organ, right? Right, you say that sounds like a organ. Yeah, if you heard that, right? Because you can't think of any other instrument that sounds like, right? It sounds like an organ. Whereas then there are flute stops. Right? There's strings. And there's a family of reed stops, which are all like either solo stops, like an oboe. Here's a trumpet. And so there are lots of sort of imitation type sounds too. And then the other thing I'd call your attention to is we have a way of controlling volume on the instrument that's not just how many stops you have. Obviously, the more stops you have out, the louder it will get. But the swell pedal right down here, it's basically a set, and I can show you up in the case. It's like a set of Venetian shutters and they're thick wood. Some organs even have like 2 things of wood and they have sand in between them. Like to really get the box that all of these pipes are in really tight and soundproof. But you put a bunch of stops inside a big box and put Venetian blinds, essentially, made of wood on the front of them, so that you end up being able to close those blinds
Well, let's go up there and take a look. Zach, thank you. This is great.
So there's this little ladder right here that goes right up to the organ. All organists also must be able to climb stairs and ladders, by the way.
Well, let's go up
It's a
there.
job requirement. So and you have to be able to do it in the cabin. So right here we have the organ blower. The black box in the back has a blowing machine in it, and what that does is it runs a bunch of air into this right here, which is called the reservoir. And you can see that the reservoir has all of these black weights on it. So once the blower puts wind into the reservoir, these weights weigh this down. As you can see, there's leather on the side of this, so it's flexible. And the amount of weight on top of the reservoir is what determines the amount of wind pressure of the wind that's going into the instrument. So what that does is the pressurized wind stays in that reservoir. When you turn on a stop, that wind rushes into a channel underneath the pipes, and there's all this pressurized air waiting there underneath the pipes to be let out when you press a key, and then the air rushes up through the pipework.
Interesting. Well, what's in this other room?
Over here, well, this is the organ itself.
Here, let me come on in.
I am sitting in the middle of the organ. The great division, which is the big, loud, triumphant sounding stuff, is right above my head. And this is called the choir division here. This is cute little things. But that's actually something that I should mention, right? So the organ has pipes that are up to 16 feet tall, which are, it's quite long, all the way down to something like this, right? So the size of pipe really does vary. Sometimes when you see drawings of pipe organs done by children or something like that, all of the pipes are the same, but that's not the case. And here's a lot of the metal pipe work, and as I just said to Doit, not all pipes are made of metal. Some are made of wood, right here. And they come in all different shapes and sizes, right? Some of them have these things on the top called tuning scrolls. Some of them don't. Some are more cylindrically shaped at the top. That's like a more cone shape. What else? Some have felt, as you can see. And a couple of things that I'll show you. One, we had mentioned that all of the pipes are mechanically connected, right? So they run right from the key all the way to the pipe. So here, if you see all of those wooden slats there, those are actually very, very lightweight. They're called trackers. And they all connect to each other, and these are the things that run all the way from the key. And see, here's the lever where it connects. All the way from the key to the pipe, and there are more right down here as well. The other thing I'd want to show you, and we talked about the swell shades, those big Venetian shutters. We're going to turn around, and here they are. There's felt right here to make sure that once they close, like right in here, once it closes, it'll get a really, really tight fit. And that's how we control the volume, right? So we could open the swell shades back up, and you can see there's the pipework behind it. This is the swell division. This is where all of the pipes that play under the choir usually live.
All right, Zach, well, thank you for introducing us to the organ and what it does for us in worship. Any final words you want to say about the organ music, or I don't know, whatever you want?
The only thing I'd say is that the organ doesn't need to be this mysterious, crazy contraption up in the chancel that you need to be afraid to go look at or wonder what it's made of or how it works. We try our best to offer organ recitals throughout the year in normal times, and also things like this. But you know what? After COVID, when we're back and things are going again, like, it doesn't matter what Sunday of the year it is. Always feel free to stop by the console afterwards. This is an instrument that doesn't belong to the staff or the organist. This belongs to the entire parish, and I'd be happy to familiarize all of you with it as much as you can.